Hi, it's Jennifer Lights a Polyp, and I know it's been a while since I have done any videos, and I wish I had a better video right now to share with you guys, but I have some very unhappy news, and so it might be a long video to kind of explain everything, but we lost Mom, and that may be something that you may already have seen on my other platforms. But I wanted to not only just share that, but kind of go into what led up to it, because she did have FAP also. And while that was not the primary cause of her death, it was a contributing factor. And unfortunately, things happened that we were unable to save her, which I will explain further. But so Mom, she lived to be 73. She had FAP. She had had her colon and rectum removed because she was diagnosed with colorectal cancer when I was 3 months old. They didn't think that she was going to make it through that. She had life-threatening complications. As soon as they wheeled her into recovery room, her stomach had turned black. So she had to have another surgery that lasted hours. Later, she had the Whipple in the mid-90s, and the Whipple itself, she did really well with. It was the pain with the Whipple, and I actually did share some of her story with that in one of my articles on Lysa Polyp about the Whipple procedure. And there is also an article that I shared about her and my grandfather who had FAP and their stories with their cancer, because they both had been diagnosed with cancer. And I'll put the links below in the description. But so Mom had been having chronic UTIs for probably at least a year and a half. We would think that it might get resolved, and it wouldn't. And in talking with our nephrologist, she said that there were times that it acted like it was going to colonize, so then it wouldn't be such a big deal. But then it wouldn't. And she did have a urologist also. And having chronic UTIs was very debilitating for her body, so that was going on, which we knew about. And then as a part of the FAP, she had developed a 20mm polyp in her bile duct, and due to the location of it, our GI doctor was unable to remove it. So every 3 months, he would have to trim it because it would become symptomatic for her. It was causing her to have liver disease. And as the time would approach that 3-month mark, she would become symptomatic. Sometimes she'd have jaundice. She would have more pain. The liver enzymes would go up. You could tell that it was an issue. Finally, they were able to find someone who thought that they could remove it, an advanced endoscopist. And he was able to burn it out. And that happened on a Monday. And the very same week, she went to the ER at the end of that week, due to UTI symptoms that were worsening. There at the ER, they found that she had a gas-producing bacteria in her bladder, which can be fatal if it's not treated early enough. It's a high risk when you have a bacteria like that that's causing gas production. That was on a Friday. She was put on Cipro. They did find a small, very, very small mass on her liver, which was suspected to maybe be scar tissue. Our GI doctor was going to do a liver ultrasound in 6 months just to check on it because it was so small. It did not look highly suspicious at that time. She did have gas in the bile duct, but she had just had that ERCP, so that was explainable. That's not uncommon to have that when you've had a procedure like that. So that made sense, and it wasn't very concerning at the time. And it wasn't from a bacteria, whereas with the bladder it was. So after that, she had a really good week and a half. And I say really good comparative to what she had been. She'd been having days where she was so fatigued that she couldn't look at her phone. She couldn't pick it up and look at it. She could not sit up on her own or stay sitting up. She was having days where she couldn't get up at all even. Dad had to get her up and wheel her around. And there were days that she just stayed on the couch pretty much all day long. She wasn't eating. And these are things that her health had been declining for the last 8 months. And it was a steady decline. She was unable to maintain weight. She could barely gain weight. She was losing about a pound a week. She had gotten down to under 110 pounds, and really it was less than that because she had a belly apron, because she'd been heavier earlier in her life, and she lost a lot of weight, particularly after the Whipple. She wasn't, before the last 8 months or so, she wasn't losing weight at a concerning rate. Yes, she'd been steadily losing weight over the years since her Whipple. She developed dumping syndrome after the Whipple. She had short bowel syndrome already from the complications with her colon and rectal removal. She had diabetes, so she had a lot of things going on. But the weight loss hadn't been a concerning rate up until the last 8 months or so, during which she lost over 40 pounds. And she was actually probably more close to 100 pounds or less, because we don't know how much the belly apron skin weighed by itself. And so it was not an accurate weight that she was getting whenever she stepped on the scale. But there were days that she wouldn't eat anything. Nothing tasted good. She wasn't hungry anymore. The only thing that kind of tasted good sometimes was sweets, which is a challenge with diabetes. But at the same time, it's kind of like we need to try to get weight on you. So eat whatever in the world you want to eat. Her labs were, her albumin had dropped down to 1.8. And albumin is something that your body needs for healing. You need protein to build muscle. And at some point, when your body is done eating its muscles, it will eat your organs. It will eat your bones. And it's a very serious issue to have a low albumin. And she was just so depleted. So she had so many different things going on, and things evidently we didn't even know about, so she had this pretty good week and a half where she was able to go out and do things. Now, she needed one of us to be with her. Most of the time she couldn't leave the house by herself. She'd gotten to that point. She didn't have the strength to step up on a curb. It wasn't always safe for her to drive anymore. So we would take her, we would help her walk, we would help keep her steady so she didn't fall over, and things like that. She was using a walker a lot of the time, and most of the time at least a cane, if nothing else. But there were some days in that week and a half that she didn't even need her cane. Yeah, she needed Dad for the support in some cases, but there were times she was walking okay, but someone was always there pretty much with her at all times. And then the next day, she was completely wiped out because with chronic illness, with chronic pain, we tend to overdo things, right? We don't pace ourselves, and then we require a longer recovery period after we have done more than what we have to work with, energy-wise, reserve-wise, strength-wise. And that was what was happening. Well, so the last 2-ish months, 2.5 months of her life, things were really, really rapidly declining. And Dad and I had conversations. We're like, okay, if things keep going the way they are, I don't think Mom's gonna last a year. I mean, what are we doing? What are we gonna do? Now, we were attributing, and the doctors were attributing everything to the UTIs and the liver disease because of that polyp. So we knew, like, we have to get that polyp out, or at least try. Well, In that ERCP where they got that big polyp out, they found a new polyp. Well, I say new because we have no idea how long it had been there, because we hadn't been able to get that far up to see because of that big polyp blocking her bile duct. It was a smaller polyp, but they decided it wasn't safe to remove at that time for whatever reason, anesthesia reasons, being in there so long, you know. So they were going to go back and do it in 3 months and try to get that polyp. Well, so a week and a half, right? So she's having this pretty good week and a half. And then all of a sudden things start to rapidly decline again. I mean, 12 hours down. Just, she had a fever. Wednesday night, she was starting to feel worse. Thursday, she had a fever. And by Friday, she couldn't do anything. She was alert and responsive and coherent. Dad asked, should she go to the hospital? I said yes. I didn't go see her that afternoon after work. I should have. Ultimately, it wouldn't have made a difference though, with what we now know. But I went over Saturday morning, and Mom was pretty good about, I could convince her to do things that she needed for her health, particularly if I could talk to her in person about it. I have a lot of medical knowledge that I have gained over the years with different jobs and my own personal education, research, trainings, things like that. I know enough to be dangerous. I know the right questions to ask doctors and things like that too, so that helps. So I convinced Mom, we need to go to the hospital. I want you to go to this hospital, and I need you to go by ambulance. Mom agreed after I explained the reasons for everything. And in the ER, we found out that she was in septic shock. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And they were doing a lot of different tests on Mom, and it was within the first week that we found out that, I think it was that first week, we found out we couldn't save Mom. Up until that point, everybody thought we could, and I think Mom had a really good fighting chance. So what we discovered was she had 4 different bacteria in her intra-abdominal cavity. They believe that there was a leak somewhere in her GI tract that was causing all this bacteria to go into her intra-abdominal cavity. They could not confirm that. If that was the case, that she was having these leaks, they were so small that they were not able to be detected by test. Now, if the hole is big enough, they could do a contrast and see it leaking into the cavity, but they did not do one with contrast, I don't believe, and they didn't find it beneficial to do so because of Mom's instability. And also, if there is a leak, right, Mom wasn't stable enough to undergo surgery. She wasn't stable to undergo anesthesia. So that alone could have killed her. And with her having so many organs removed, what exactly are they going to fix a hole with? And that's assuming there's just one hole. It wasn't feasible to correct this for Mom. Now, if Mom had been healthier, hadn't been, say it was 6 months ago instead of, earlier in her decline of health, then maybe they could have done it if they were able to have enough things to reset or whatever. But the odds are they still couldn't, because when you're missing so many organs, you're very limited on what they can do when you have an issue with that organ. And And the thing is that this wasn't an issue really 6 months ago, 4 months ago. It was a new issue. It was a new issue because when they did the CT scan on the day we went to the ER that she got admitted to in the last 2 weeks of her life, there was what looked like an abscess on her liver. That was not there. We went to the ER that 2 weeks before that. Yes, there was a small mass, a small lesion type mass. But it was very, very small. And at that time, there was not indication to do more testing in the ER at that time. There wasn't cause for her to be admitted at that time. So, and the thing is, right, like she was doing really good. It was up until that Thursday that it went bam, bam. It exploded. Like, there weren't clear signs. There were not clear signs. So it wasn't something that was missed by us or the doctors. There were no clear signs. And she had so many things going on that they could easily have been attributed to this, or both of these, or all three of these, or whatever. There was no clear way to do this differently until it was too late, unfortunately. So she had a liver abscess. She had, from the liver disease, she had started to have fluid collecting in her peritoneal cavity. And this entire time, mom has had chronic pain for years. Now, yes, it was worsened in a lot of different ways, but we knew part of it's because of that polyp, part of the liver disease. Part of it was she got diagnosed with RA. She also has PMR, which is polymyalgia rheumatica. So she had autoimmune disorders that cause pain. She was scheduled to start getting biologic infusions for the inflammation to also try to help with that pain starting mid-June. So we were attributing her issues to all these different conditions that were known, and we were heavily working on. So she had the intra-abdominal infection that became septic. She had infection in her urinary tract from the UTI. She had bloodstream sepsis. We found out that, and what we didn't realize, mom was having increased difficulty swallowing, but we didn't really know that. And this was probably the last 2 weeks, or not 2 weeks, last 2 months of her life. Well, her body had become so depleted nutritionally and was, basically it's eating itself, essentially. So her esophageal muscles had become so weak that she was, toward the end of her life there, the last month of her life, she wasn't able to swallow properly. She was having a lot of hard time. And looking back now, it makes sense why she was having difficulty drinking from this. We had gotten her one of these to help with her hydration. And she had a really hard time using it. And looking back, it makes sense now because her esophageal muscles were just non-existent, really. So in the hospital, she'd been beginning to aspirate, and they had placed an NG tube in to help with her nutrition. But with the NG tube, it wasn't staying down the nutrition. It was, she was aspirating, so she developed pneumonia. She was developing fluid collection in the space between her lungs. So they had also put a central line in. Well, she couldn't do TPN because her sugar became uncontrollable. And this was an issue we'd been seeing outside at home, is that she wasn't reacting to insulin properly. It had changed. It was barely effective anymore. Either she was completely low or she was outrageously high. It wasn't calculating her blood sugars anymore. And insulin barely touched it. Her body was so out of whack on so many different things. So they couldn't do TPN because they couldn't control her sugar. And she was also swelling a lot because she was being pumped full of so many different things. She had 2 IVs and a central line. Because you can't mix some things together in the same line. So she had all these. I'll show you a picture. They brought in an IV pole that had, I think it held 8 different pumps. Because she had so many different things they were trying to 1, keep her alive, and 2, get her to a stable point, so that they could, well, eventually the goal was to get her home on hospice. Initially the goal was to, when we thought there was a chance, to get her into a rehab, to get her home. But because she is so depleted nutritionally, her veins were no longer able to keep the fluid in the bloodstream. So it would leak out of the veins into the surrounding tissues. So actually, by the time upon Mom's death, she was weighing 100 and almost 150 pounds because she had that much swelling and fluid in her that her veins weren't able to control. She was just weeping fluid from her body. So she was at a 10 on the pain scale at the ER that day that we took her in, which really for Mom was probably like a 20 for a typical person. As you may know, with chronic illness, with chronic pain, our pain scales are completely different from the typical person. We are used to higher pain levels, right? And what we consider to be the worst imaginable is out of this world to someone else. For example, my 10 is, I compare that to when I was cut open as a child without sedation, without effective pain medication. That's my 10. I don't know what that would be for a normal person, what that would be on their scale, but that's my 10. So I compare every type of pain to that. Is it as bad as that? Probably not. Probably not. This can be really terrible. But for me, it's probably not the same as being cut open, awake, without pain medicine. I'm still better about that, by the way. But so by 5 o'clock Sunday morning, Mom made it through the night. They didn't think she was going to make it. It was minute to minute. They had no idea if Mom was going to make it. And she wasn't out of the woods still, but her pain was a 0. Her pain was a 0. So that Saturday they had done paracentesis to remove the ascites, the fluid in her peritoneal cavity, which was causing her a lot of pain, that they discovered that day. They had tried to drain what they thought was the abscess, but it wasn't looking 100% like an abscess, so they weren't able to really get anything from that at that time. Mom has a zest for life, and yes, I know I still use the present tense on a lot of things, and that's because she's with me, and it feels dishonoring to her to put everything as past tense because yes, she's not here physically, but she's here with me. I know she is, and I can explain that further when we get along in the story of Mom's last couple weeks. But she was defying odds. She defied odds constantly, all her life, until her last breath. So, the doctor was like, I think we need to put her on a vent because it's getting harder for her to breathe because of the pneumonia. When we try to give her anything nutritionally that's not in an IV, she's aspirating. Let's give her lungs a break. We can get her pain under control because we can't get it under control because at this point they put a tube in for that liver abscess to help it drain, a drain tube, and then her pain was uncontrolled again, and she's having a hard time, you know, with her blood pressures, and pain medicine can make your blood pressure drop, and so they were like, we can't manage everything. And at this time they still thought Mom had a chance. We didn't know yet. So Mom was coherent. She wanted to be involved in her care. She wanted to know what was going on. She and I was the one that explained most everything to her. I mean, the ICU doctor would come in and talk to her, which was a relief to Mom. But the rounds in ICU that they have, it's like 10, 15 people, providers in these rounds. They can't fit into the ICU rooms, so they do them outside the rooms. So they weren't always coming in there, and usually Dad or I were there for the rounds, and so I would explain everything to Mom. So with the vent, they were able to block her lungs from so they could put food in through the NG tube, and it would go straight to her stomach, and the vent blocked it from coming back up into her lungs, and so they were able to get her a little bit better nutritionally then. Her body couldn't maintain it though, in part because of the liver disease. So then, as they were doing more and more tests, they did tests probably every day, almost every day on Mom. And that's when they found out. They couldn't rule out cancer. They still couldn't rule that out, but they thought that the cause for the liver abscess, the cause for the polymicrobial infection was most likely due to some type of leak in her GI tract somewhere, but they couldn't, find out where it was to confirm that even, and they couldn't fix it even if they could. And in the meantime, we also found out that Mom had a blood clot in her portal vein. That's the main vein in the liver. And we're unsure how long that had been there. They did list it as chronic, though, in her records, which also limits what you can do if it's a chronic blood clot because it becomes hardened. And if they tried to resolve that, it could lead to other issues. It could break off and send a blood clot to somewhere else in her body, to a different organ. And so they believe, they weren't able to confirm again, but they believe that it looked that like a part of her liver had died from the lack of blood supply from that blood clot. Again, that was not able to be confirmed completely because they weren't able to do, all the procedures and the testings that they would have needed to do to confirm anything 100%. Mom wasn't able to undergo those things, and just having the paracentesis could have killed her because they had to give her mild sedation for that, and these were decisions that Dad and I made. These decisions together. We've always been on the same page. The three of us operated as a unit. Always. And so Dad deferred to me a lot though because of my medical knowledge and relationship with the doctors and things. So Dad was getting us dinner that first day in the ER before she was officially admitted, and so I was the one that had to make the decision because at that point, in septic shock, Mom was not allowed to make her own decisions. And so I signed. We're gonna do this, and I understand that she might die because she's having some anesthesia. And I made her DNR at that time. Because let's face it, really, even a healthy person is gonna endure trauma from CPR because your ribs are gonna be broken. That can puncture your organs. If your ribs are not broken, even as a healthy person undergoing CPR, they probably weren't actually doing it correctly. And mom in her 70s, it would have just pulverized her bones. It would have just caused too much trauma. And even if she survived it, it probably wouldn't have been any decent quality life for her. And I know for me, I am all about quality. I do not care about quantity of life. I am about the quality of life. So mom made it through the night, that first night. And I think that Monday she had full capacity again. And so I told her what was going on, and that we had made her DNR, but we would make her full code again. What does she want? What does she want to do? These are the risks. We're going to do what you want to do. And she said, I want to be full code again. And I said, okay. You know, at this point, there's a fighting chance anyways. And personally, I am not someone who, I am a DNR. I'm a do not resuscitate. I do not want to endure that trauma. I don't want to take the risk. When I'm gone, just let me go. I respect that that's not everybody's wishes. And while I medically understood that it was medically not really sound for mom to be a full code, that was her wish, so we honored it. So I'm gonna put her on the vent. So I tell mom, I think this is the best thing to do right now. So I recommend it. What do you want to do? We had palliative care came in and they reviewed all of the things with mom. And mom said, I want to be full code. I want to be on the vent. If they can't take me off the vent at 2 weeks' time, I agree to have a tracheostomy put in so that they can wean me off the vent, and for a peg tube put in for feeding. Well, during this time, now mom, after the first day of being on the vent, she became alert and responsive. And she wasn't unresponsive before, but she wasn't alert. She wasn't oriented. She wasn't, she was very sedated. They got the sedation down, I think, to 0, eventually. But, so after that first day of being after the first full day being on the vent, she was responsive. She was coherent, had capacity again. And we found out that there was no hope. So I got to tell mom that and explain that to her. And sometime during that time, we made her DNR again with mom's consent. We put her on hospice at the end, and it wasn't really a question. I didn't pose it as a question to mom. I said, look, we need to put you on hospice. Do you want to be on hospice? Do you want to stay in the hospital? Do you want to go home? Do you want to go to a hospice facility? What is your preference if we can do any of those things? Her preference was to go home. We didn't make it home. And it turned out for the best that way. But we're not to that part of the story yet. There were times, so mom had a really hard time talking the last 2 weeks, and when her health would get really bad where she could barely move by herself, her talking got worse. And But it was still better at home than what it was when we got to the hospital. As the time went on, as the day went on, her speaking got worse, and it was hard for her to make sentences, and her mouth was so dry. She already had dry mouth issues to begin with, but she was not taking anything anyways, so she had barely any, you know, her lips were sticking to her teeth, and so I was really the only one that could really understand what Mom was trying to say. So I would interpret for a lot, and I wouldn't always get 100%, and she'd get frustrated with me. But then when she went on events, she couldn't speak, obviously, because you have the tube down your throat. But she communicated with me with head movements, with her eyebrows, and toward the end with shrugs. Some days it was easier for her to communicate than other times. Even on the vent, there were days that she was more expressive. But before the vent, she would ask the nurses, is my husband or daughter, are they here yet? Not yet. It's still, you know, like super early in the morning. They're on their way. I'd walk in, I'm like, hi, Mama. I called Mom Mamo for some reason a lot of times. I'm like, hi, Mamo. And she just lit up. All these tubes in her. She just lit up. You could tell. You could just tell. She'd smile, even kind of with the vent. She'd kind of try to. So yeah, so I got to tell her she wasn't gonna make it. So the day we put her on hospice, they were taking her off the vent. She's out the NG2. And they were gonna remove it. But they were waiting. Because I thought, well, if she wants pleasure feeds, like, we could keep it in. We could put a peg tube in, maybe. I didn't see any reason. Mom didn't care about food before she came into the hospital. I don't think she's gonna have pleasure feeding's desire. And at that point, does it really matter? Let her have it if she wants. If she aspirates, she aspirates. So her pain, they'd put in another tube, another drain tube on the other side. The day before this. And I think I may have gotten it wrong. They had a liver drain tube in for the liver abscess and one for the peritoneal because of the ascites. And I forget which was first, but it didn't matter because whenever she'd have a drain, her pain was uncontrollable again. Okay, well, they could only do what they could do without being on hospice. And they would have to take her off the pressors that was helping keep her blood pressure up. So I went in and I said, Mom, what do you want me to do? They are going to try to move you to a hospice facility because you're not stable enough to go home. Or if you want to try to stay here at the hospital, we can do that. They were planning to do that this afternoon, though, to try to get you to the facility, get you officially started on hospice. You may not make it on the stretcher ride over there. Do you want me to start hospice right now so they can get your pain under control? It will stop this medicine. You can become unconscious. You can die quicker than you would. And she said, well, she didn't speak. So she's off the vent at this point. Still has an NG tube in. For this, they tell you not to try to speak for the first 30 minutes after being on the vent. But even then, she didn't. She tried one time. I had called my twin nieces, and I put them on speakerphone to talk to her, and they were like, "Hi, Aunt Ina," and she goes, and she had that lit up expression when she saw me. I said, "She tried to say hi to you girls." the one time she tried to speak after the fit. And that's a precious memory she gave them. So Mom communicated with her head movements. And she wanted her to get the pain under control. So I went and I told them, and the doctor wanted to come talk to me. She didn't make it to come talk to me before Mom was complaining about pain again, and I said, okay. The palliative care nurse practitioner was there, and I said, I need Mom. We gotta start hospice right now. Mom's in pain. It's uncontrollable. I need her to have her pain controlled. That's what she wants. That's what I need. They called the IC doctor. She came over right away. And she's like, and she's always so great. She was so great. So great. Always so great. She goes, what do I need me to do? I said, I need that NG tube out. I need it out. I want Mom to have some time awake without it, because her and I hate them. We hate NG tubes. They're so painful. I want her to have some time awake, as comfortable as possible. They pulled it before I even knew it. They got her pain under control. Well, they started the hospice pain medication because they could give that obviously more frequently than when you're not on hospice. So she'd had a dose of pain medicine off of hospice. They started hospice. They gave her pain medicine again. She complained of pain to me again. So I went and I told him. And that time she became unconscious. And the nurse told me she became unconscious before she even fully put the dose in. And she was looking at me and smiling. My one regret is I was looking at her. I was watching them put the medicine in because I knew she could die any second. And it hastened that with pain medicine every time. I was watching them put the pain medicine syringe in. And then I was gonna look at Mom. She became unconscious before I could. So my one regret is I wasn't looking at her. I didn't meet her gaze. I keep being told to take comfort that she was looking at me and smiling, and she knew. She knew. I was doing everything to protect her. Like I have been always. My regret though is that I wasn't looking at her. And that my eyes looking back at her were not the last thing she saw before becoming unconscious. I was distracted. So they didn't think she was going to even make it on the stretcher ride to the hospice facility. And I was kind of freaking out. So the first night that she was admitted, Dad and I stayed with her all night because I couldn't bear the thought of not being with her when she died. If she died. And I knew if she made it through the first night, I could more easily accept if I wasn't there. Although I was going to still be there a lot. And they weren't sure that they would let me be with her on the ride over there. So really, more so for me, they kept her at the hospital that night, and they were like, okay, if she persists, are you okay if we move her to the facility? And I said, yes. Excuse me. So she persisted. They didn't think she was going to make it through the night. I didn't think she was going to make it through the night. And one thing to always do for a dying person is give them permission to go. They need that. They need that. And they need to hear that from everybody that comes to visit them, really. But Mom, the fighter who never would give up. Her vitals would start to go bam, and we'd give her permission. We'd be saying our goodbyes. Then they'd get better. Every time. She's like, I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna show you. So, I mean, literally, her heart rate was 45 for hours. The last time we gave her permission to go at the hospital, she jumped it up to 75, and she stayed there for hours until she actually was admitted to the hospice facility. Her oxygen level was down in the 70s for hours. She jumped it up to the 90s for hours. I stopped giving Mom permission. I didn't take back permission. I just quit telling her. I'm like, Mom, you clearly are gonna do what you want to do. So, and there was a point though, honestly, like during that night, that first night, I was begging her to go. I begged her to go. And I'm so glad she didn't listen to me. Because that next morning, this was a Friday. She's still hanging on to final odds. Our nephrologist came in to say goodbye to her. And I was telling her, I was like, I don't, she has things that she's finishing up that she needs to do. Don't rush her. Just enjoy the time you have with her. Just love on her. And I was like, okay, that makes complete sense. I can do that. So instead of living every second as Mom's gonna die this second, I shifted my focus to just, I'm gonna soak you up, Mama. I'm gonna soak you up, and I'm going to love on you so hard. This is our time. This is our time together, the three of us as a family, as the unit we always have been and always will be. Because just because someone's not here physically doesn't mean they're not here. I don't believe that. She's with me. And I still have the story left on that to tell you. So I just soaked her up. So they called IMSA and they took Mom into the hospice facility. IMSA was so kind and let me ride with her. Dad and I stayed that first night with her too, that I'll be on hospice. And I stayed with her from that night on until she died. There was one night in that time that Dad did not, because he hadn't slept for 2 nights and he was exhausted, understandably. But it afforded me mommy-daughter time. So if you have, if you're having to be on hospice or put someone on hospice and home hospice is not the option, a hospice facility is incredible. Our experience was this. So they took her in They wouldn't let us be in there with her while they were getting her ready. They said, what color gown for her? And I said, purple. Purple's Mama's favorite color. They found a purple paisley gown, which was so Mom. Mom has this beautiful paisley shirt that I just love. And it was like that. So they washed her. She smelled so good. The hospice facility was like a home. It was every room was like your own suite. You had your own bathroom. There's laundry on site. There's showers on site. There's a family room and a break room. They make you coffee and tea and water there. They have toasters and fridges that you can put your stuff in. And it's a secure facility. And they had beautiful grounds. So we get in there, get Mama settled. Daddy's like, okay, I'm gonna go home so I can sleep. I'm gonna come back at like 1:30 in the morning. Because again, now we're at the hospice facility. They're like, okay, she's hour to hour. Okay. So I spent mommy-daughter time with Mama. We had conversations. I know Mama wasn't responsive, but I know she could hear me. So we had these conversations, wonderful conversations. I cuddled up with her. I loved on her. I kissed on her. I held her hand. I talked to her. I played her favorite musicians that I could remember. I danced for Mama. I just loved her. I just loved on her. And it was so wonderful. And yeah, this is the three of us, but it was really nice having mommy-daughter time too. You know, just like how I had daddy-daughter time. I loved on Mama so much. I just loved on her. I didn't leave her side except to go to the bathroom. And when they would reposition her, they asked me to leave the room, and so I would. Every time, ever since the hospital, every time I left Mama's room, I made it like a goodbye. And I had to do the right goodbye. Sometimes I always had to give Mama a kiss goodbye. Somewhere, her face, her cheek, her forehead, her hand. I didn't care where the heck I gave her a kiss. I had to give her a kiss. I had to say goodbye and I love you. There were times that I walked up and down that ICU 3 times because I didn't say the right goodbye. And when she was on hospice, they always knew I wanted to be present when they gave her the pain medicine. And then if I wasn't there, I was in the bathroom or I was getting food from the cafeteria. So just, let me know before you're going to give it, and I'll, that way I can make sure I'm here. And they always waited for me because they knew I wanted to be present and be there for Mama when the time came. So we're in this facility. It was perfect. And I believe absolutely that Mama, she hung on for 2.5 days because she knew, she had to have known that she was going to end up there and she was going to give us the time with her that we needed to sustain us. And this was her gift to us. And especially to me, because my parents, everybody knows how overly attached I am to my parents. And this was one of my worst nightmares, is to lose a parent. So Mama really gave me this gift. So Dad comes up 1:30 in the morning and he stays with me and Mama until Mama went. They had a VHS player there, so Daddy brought up our home videos and we played them for Mom, and I tell her what was going on in them, and it was just amazing. It was an amazing time with Mama. One of my friends told me about this sacred ritual for someone who's dying or has passed, and it included oil, like essential oils and rose petals and a bath and all these things. Well, I didn't have all that things, so I did have some lavender scented body oil. So I bathed her, essentially, her body in this oil twice while she was still alive and once after she passed. And my friend had said, you just pay, and part of the ritual is you pay attention to every part of their body, every part of them as you are bathing and, you know, basically loving on them, you know, giving them a cleansing, you could say. I did, I just soaked up every bit of mama I could. And so she went from hours to hours to within hours to minutes to hours, and she's still defying the odds. They're like, we don't think she's gonna even make it to this evening. She lasted another 8 hours. 8 hours. Oh, and the doctor, the hospice doctor, actually consulted on me when I was in high school during my life-threatening complications after reversal. And he remembered me. Well, he remembered my face, and we remembered him. So we got a really great catching up, and I told Mom, I was like, Mama, it's him. Like, you remember all this, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, that was a cool coincidence. So she was her breathing was changing, and it kept changing. Within an hour and a half, it just kept consistently changing. And so I would study Mom. I'd be right there staring at her and analyzing everything she was doing. And after about 3 hours of that, I gave up, and I was like, okay, Mama, all right, I'm done. You're probably tired of me staring at you and analyzing every single breath you take. And sometime, I think before that, like right before, she became responsive. She was still unconscious, but she grimaced. I touched her hand, and she went, well, I mean, when you're dying, your mouth is, actually, it's kind of like that. And so she went more. And I was like, and they tell you, like, you know, they always ask, like, have you noticed anything? Like, the hospice nurses are incredible at being able to tell, like, when a patient is in pain or tense, anxious, things like that, even though they're unconscious. And so I was like, she's responsive over here. And she was blinking her eyes, and so they were like, I think she's having a lot more pain, so we need to adjust her pain. Okay. During this time, though, I was talking to her about her step-grandson, and she blinked when I said, you know how he feels about you. You know his heart. And she blinked that second. I believe she was giving me a sign. I do. And then I was holding her hand, and I was talking to her, and I don't remember exactly what I was talking about, but it was about, you know, me loving her and you know, basically giving her permission again and things like that to go. And she blinked that second. I believe that was a sign. And so I've had a lot of loss in my life, friends, family, a lot of loss. My grandpa and my great uncle, when I gave them permission to go, they both responded to me. My grandpa squeezed my hand, and my great uncle, he moved his head up like that to look at me. It was a very drastic response. I was like, whoa. Whoa. And even with Mama, when they gave me the response that they had heard me when I gave them permission, all three of them died the next day. So I took a nap during the night because I was just exhausted. And I was like, okay, I can't stay up. I'm gonna fall asleep, and I'm not gonna be able to catch Mama, because we know, like, she's surely not making it through the weekend into the new week. Like, they're like, okay, medically, scientifically, she should not be alive right now, like, at all. But she was doing things. she was giving us a gift. So Dad had fallen asleep, and I was editing videos and pictures and things, because one thing Mama always raised me up as was to document your life. Mom and Dad were always taking home videos of us, you know, our activities, of me. There's just tapes and tapes of just everyday things. Mama watching me do. Daddy watching me do. Me doing things with them. So I've always documented life, because part of my PTSD is it gives me if I have something visual, something tangible even, that I can, when I'm in a tailspin, to help bring me out of it back into the present moment, to help me remember. Because with my anxiety, with a trigger, with depression, it's really hard for me to just remember, and I get consumed and overwhelmed. And so I really need those visual reminders, those tangible mementos, to help me remember and stay in the present moment and focus. I get more focused, more grounded. So I take pictures of my dead loved ones, my dying loved ones. I do. And I don't really care what people think about that, because it gives me some peace to hold on to later. And just because someone's dying, or someone has died, to me does not, I'm not going to treat them different. They are still with me. I'm not going to treat them different, like they're not there. They're not a person. They're not who they are. I'm still going to talk to them, whether they're dying or they've died already. I'm not going to treat them different. So that offends some people. That's your deal, not mine. So, and Daddy's the same way, right? And Mommy's the same way. So I have all these pictures of Mama with Daddy, with me, the three of us. Our last family photo, things like that. So I was editing them, because I always Daddy and I take tons of pictures, and then I have to edit them and, you know, get rid of the ones that we don't need or whatever. Right? And I noticed Mom's breathing's different. Because it gotten to where, like, you know, you could tell it was like laborious breathing, but there were times that it just sounded like someone snoring, just sleeping normally. And like, yeah, not a normal breathing pattern, but, you know, it sounded like she was snoring, or she's just kind of, you know, asleep, breathing irregularly. But this was different. She never had the death rattle, which is when air is escaping the body upon death, or about to, you know, right before, right during, whatever. It kind of makes a rattling sound. She didn't have that. It was more of a and it was the breath escaping her, the oxygen. So Dad's fast asleep, like, I mean, because he's just exhausted. I'm like, Dad, I think Mom's dying, Dad. And I didn't even think at the time. I mean, I did, but I didn't, to just press the call button. I mean, and we were literally like the nurse's station was right outside our room. But anyways, instead I had to go get him. And my thing, right, was like, you know, I wanted to be present for Mom, and I believed Mom wanted me and Dad to be present. She didn't want to. Some people, they want to be by themselves, or they don't want their loved ones there when they do pass. And there were times, like that first night in the hospital in hospice, Dad would not leave Mom by herself. One of us had to be there. And it got to the point that I was like, Dad, maybe she wants us to go. Like, let's give her some time. Like, let's go together to the bathroom. Go get a drink, you know, from the break room, whatever. And he was like, no, you can go ahead and do that if you need to, but I'm going to be right here. Well, eventually I got to the point where Dad was like, okay. And she still hung on. And so the nurse told me that I caught her. I was there with her, standing with her, looking at her as she was dying, which for me, gives me some peace. Mom's gaze was fixed upon Dad as she was dying. She was fixed upon me and she became unconscious, and she was fixed upon Dad when she died. And hospice is incredible. So whether you're at home or at a facility or in the hospital, you notify hospice and say, okay, this person has died. And then you say, I want some time with them. And then you tell them, okay, I'm ready. And you can spend as much time as you want. Now at the hospital, they gave us 4 hours if she had died in the hospital. But at home, in the facility, they give you as much time as you want. And they call the funeral home for you. So I bathed Mama one more time in that lavender oil. And I talked to her. And I kissed on her and loved on her. And I put my head to her forehead. And one of the things that, let me back up. So one of the things our nephrologist had said when she told me not to rush Mama and just soak in Mom is that Mom is also giving me her strength and her power, and that Mom is a very incredibly powerful person. And Mama made our doctor a better doctor, she said. So I put my head to our foreheads together, and I could feel her giving me her strength and her power. And not just that, but herself. I felt her coursing in my veins all day that day. And I know she's still with me. And it was like she gave me a mission. Before, my mission was to take care of my Mama and keep her alive and give her the best, make sure she got the best medical care that she could. Right? And then it became to keep her alive by keeping her alive in me. So physically she's gone, but she's still alive. And as long as I keep her alive here, she's alive. She's alive. So that's why she's alive. That's why this is the present tense. That's how I know she's here. I feel her with me all the time still. And so I had to say the right goodbye, right? I decided I didn't want to be there when the funeral home came to get her. I felt complete. We had to have a specific goodbye too, because Dad likes to stop and talk. We're all 3 gabbers. And he would stop and talk to the nurses. And I'm like, okay, Daddy, we need to do this again. I need you with me. We're going to say goodbye again to Mama. I need us to walk out silently. When we get outside, we can talk. But this is what I need right now, okay? Okay. All right, girl. So we did. And I thought he gave them a facial expression to the nurses, because they heard all this too. You know, they were familiar with me. We got outside. We see the beautiful grounds of the hospice facility. It's a sunrise still going on. We go to Mama's car. There's a dragonfly in the grill. Now, Mama had this affinity for dragonflies the last couple of years of her life. And I said, Daddy, what do you think that means? And he goes, I caught her. Daddy caught her. So, that's the story of Mama, of losing Mama. Now, and these are just some takeaways that I took away that I want to share with you also. So if you have chronic UTIs, you need to be seen by a urologist, and they need to be the one that manages it, even if you have a nephrologist or a primary care doctor, because a urologist is going to want to do a straight cath to get the sample of urine to test. They can do that to make sure that what the true infection bacteria is, and if they need to refer you to infectious disease specialist to give you IV antibiotics. Okay, that's the first thing that I have gained from this, right? But yeah, so that's the story of Mama. That's the story of Mama. And I'm keeping Mama's legacy alive by keeping her alive. And I invite everyone to do that too. Thank you guys for listening. I know it's been a very long story. But it's my Mama, and I love her so much, and she's still with me. And take her with you too. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Life's a Polyp blog and shop, and subscribe and like, and I'll talk to you soon.